Now, we've had one or two little brushes with social media in this organisation. Here at talkRADIO, of course, we famously had a little spat with YouTube, which seems to now have been resolved. They've taken down our channel before. We had it reinstated. There's now a kind of growing call for some form of censorship on social media, which has seemingly set the cat amongst the pigeons. But leading the charge, you might find it slightly surprising to know, are the Duke and Duchess of Netflix. No less, Meghan and Harry, who have basically said that they would like to somehow control what it is that people are allowed to say on social media. Well, I'd have one question for them. What the hell's it got to do with you? Let's talk to Emma Webb, Deputy Research Director at the Free Speech Union, Associate Fellow at Civitas. She's written a piece for Spiked Online about this. Emma, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. They do make a rather odd couple in all sorts of ways, don't they? The Duke and Duchess of Netflix, as we like to call them. You know, what on earth are they thinking, representing, and who do they think they represent in this kind of quest to silence people?
Yeah, so they said last year that they famously wanted to carve out this new progressive role for themselves. And one of the ways that they said that they wanted to do this was by eliminating online bullying and hate speech. And before last year, one of the first things that they did was they tacked themselves onto this hashtag Stop Hate for Profit campaign,
Right.
which was a sort of social media boycott mainly against Facebook, making certain demands about the content that they will put up, demanding they get rid of misinformation, and so almost demanding that they create this sort of woke corporate infrastructure where experts would evaluate their policies and whether or not certain content had the potential to cause hate. And so now what they've done with their horrifically named Archewell Foundation, using their son to forward their woke agenda. So now the Archewell Foundation has partnered with a department in UCLA, the University of California, and it's a center called the Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. And this is run by a bunch of two woke, I suppose you would call them woke, critical theorists, who one of them wrote a book called Algorithms of Oppression. And it's all about how Google is racist, how the algorithms perpetuate racism and discrimination on the basis of sex, race, and so on.
Yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it?
Now
It's one of those.
have officially partnered with them.
It's one of those things, isn't it, that people talk about. I mean, I found myself in some kind of bizarre left-wing sort of debating chamber one day last week, where they were debating about reparations to people historically and who should get reparation money and when it should be paid to them and who should be responsible for paying it. I thought to myself, you know, there are entire swathes of the world now talking about stuff that most people don't actually give a stuff about, you know, and this is another one, algorithms of, what was it, algorithms of hate or something? I mean, you know.
Algorithms of oppression.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's, you know, these people don't have enough to do, clearly.
It's also completely inappropriate for Harry. He is a prince, however much he removes himself, and of course he's sort of he's it's almost as if he's wearing his sort of soldier's khaki with a high-vis jacket on top. He really wants to be out of the limelight, but is desperate to constantly remain relevant. And it's totally inappropriate for the prince to be pushing what is essentially a political agenda. And also particularly because one of the founders of this internet center that they're partnering with the founders had co-authored a paper with a UN special rapporteur that had suggested that the UN should be essentially coordinating internet censorship. So the big tech companies' practices should be coordinated by the UN. He's involving himself not so much in domestic politics, but in international politics in a way that is completely inappropriate for a member of any royal family to be doing.
Of course.
And also, I think he would find that the majority of the British public not only would think that it's inappropriate for him to be trying to censorship the masses, which is an extremely elitist thing to attempt to do, as well as the fact that he shouldn't be involving himself with this critical theory ideology.
No, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it, for him? Because at the end of the day, he's having to side with these various organisations which are inevitably politically driven. It's not about censorship of all nasty people. It's about censorship of nasty people on one side of the argument. You know, like they're all very much excitable about banning Donald Trump from Twitter, but they're not so keen on Antifa being banned. And when they hear about that, suddenly it's all terrible. I mean, I was reading a story today that Facebook have now signed up with a load of a contract with a load of media publishers in this country in order to sort of try and escape being sanctioned by the government. But believe it or not, they've gone into bed with all sorts of news providers, including The Guardian, the Financial Times and Sky News. You know, and you just go, well, you know where that's going, don't you?
Yeah, it feels as if following all of the stuff that happened with big tech and their anti-competitive behavior, trying to prevent even the alternatives in the form of Parler from operating, that they sort of are chasing everybody off of their platforms that they don't agree with, and then denying them the possibility of accessing social media elsewhere at a time when everybody is locked inside. And for all of these large corporates, and now for a prince and his wife to be using their position to try to censor people that they disagree with on the basis of an ideology that is disputed and shouldn't just be accepted as if it's somehow politically neutral. I that goes beyond winding up normal people. I think that this is a serious crisis for free speech, and it poses a significant threat.
Yeah, because I mean, that's, I suppose, where this conversation ends up, doesn't it? How do you control people who have seemingly no controls other than the ones that they put on themselves? You know, because you look at YouTube, you look at Facebook, you look at Twitter, you know, basically these are run by very successful individuals who are as flawed as any other individual, presumably, but who make policy based on a whim and what they think they want to see and what they think they want to hear. And they clearly do not take the view that everybody is equal.
There's a serious problem, I think, with these large corporates, and it is perfectly epitomised in Harry and Meghan's involvement. As you say, that they're not accountable,
No.
it poses an obvious threat to democracy, because there's nothing that can be done to stop these people who have an inordinate amount of power to control the sorts of information that we can access and the sorts of things that we're allowed to think. And this has a direct impact on things like our right to a freedom of conscience, because if they want the UN or the Archewell Foundation or the powers that be internationally to dictate really what sorts of information we can even consider when making our own minds up about these things. And that's completely inappropriate.
And it betrays a certain arrogance as well, doesn't it? That they believe themselves to be so righteous and so right about everything that only they can judge which horrible, nasty people should be stopped from saying whatever it is that they want to say. And what I find extraordinary is that Harry just sees no irony whatsoever in pointing out the privilege of people, when he perhaps is one of the most privileged people, one of the top 10 most privileged people in the entire world.
God forbid that we should accuse Harry and Meghan of hubris. But it has become it's become almost an ongoing joke that every now and then they come out with one of these slightly sickly videos lamenting their own position in the world in a way that is completely unrelatable for others. And there's a kind of paternalistic element to this, that they seem to be entirely lacking self-awareness, that they are behaving paternalistically in a way that, and I personally speaking, I'm a monarchist, and I can see the arguments from the other side against the monarchy because of the sorts of things that they're doing. That it goes beyond issues simply to do with free speech to complicated international and domestic politics. And I don't think that they really understand exactly what they're getting themselves involved in here, and what they're meddling with, and what the implications of this are. I think they potentially think that they're just being nice and trying to do good in the world, and I don't have the necessarily the breadth of knowledge or the vision to see exactly what the negative
Yeah.
implications of that are on normal people.
I take a much less charitable view than you on this, Emma. I think that they know exactly what they're doing, and I think it's purely about making money, because there's a lot of money in the wokerati out there. There's a lot of money in being the front man and the front woman for a movement for change, because it makes you sound like a really good person, because anybody who doesn't want to change anything obviously is an absolute and utter ghastly individual, and that's now the narrative. But I'm interested in how you go from being a relatively unknown actress and a relatively well-known prince to becoming these kind of culture warriors. I mean, I think it can only be a very deliberate move to try and monetize wokeism.
Well, it does seem that there is a lot of money and financial incentive for some of these big companies to jump on the censorship bandwagon. All of them are doing it, and it's something that we've been seeing for a long time in with large corporates attaching themselves onto particular political causes and lobbying. So it's no surprise that in almost setting themselves up as the prince and princess across the water, that they're, and particularly given Meghan's views that she's expressed before, having managed to achieve such an enormous platform as a princess, and now they have freed themselves from having to do any of the duties that a royal would be expected to do, and can focus entirely on their own self-promotion. And unfortunately, that self-promotion seems to be at the detriment of freedom of speech and freedom of conscience.
Yes, it just never stops either. Emma, it's a great article. Find it on Spiked Online. Emma Webb there talking to us from the Free Speech Union, Deputy Research Director, also Associate Fellow at Civitas. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary. And this is why I have always targeted Harry and Meghan, not just because of their ridiculousness, not just because of their pomposity, but because if you allow people like them to somehow think they've got a foothold in how society is framed, they will take that foothold and they will keep climbing up it until such time as they think they're in charge, and then they think they can tell you what to do. And there's enough people telling us what to do already without Harry and Meghan joining the particular cause, isn't there?